Welcome, Elaine Ellinger, to the Biodigital Convergence Transhumanist Report. Thank you so much for giving us of your time. I really appreciate your work. I was really excited to discover you, and really impressed, right? You've really brought a level of, I don't know, superior academic work to this conversation, and I'm going to call you a non-Muslim expert on Islamic theology and doctrine. I think that's a great way of capturing yourself and the work that you've done. So, first order of business, quick bio. Miss Ellinger's interest in Islam began in 1983, owing to a chance encounter with a Baha'i refugee who fled Iran during the revolution. At that time, Miss Ellinger was working as a child protection social worker in Canada. Since then, she has spent many years researching, writing, and speaking about the growing influence of Sharia in non-Islamic countries from the perspective of a non-Muslim. Formerly, Canadian director and senior researcher for a European think tank focused on Islamic doctrine. She founded the Perspectives of Islam Society in 2023 for the express purpose of providing public education on the primary teachings of Islam in the context of current events. So, wow. Yeah, thank you. This is definitely something that needs to be discussed now, especially when we're seeing all these, I'm going to say like a strong Islamic demonstrations. We're seeing like these, I'm going to call them somewhat Islamist, pro-Palestine protests. Anyway, it definitely stirred my interest into the topic. So that's one of the reasons why I've discovered you actually, because of what we're seeing on the streets and some of the things that are being said, and I mean, I realize there's a diverse spectrum of thought within these protesters anyway, and I'm definitely on the counter protesting side of it. But okay, welcome, Elaine. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. So let's dive into question number one right off the top. Is Are there distinctions to be made between Islam, Islamists, and jihadists? So that would be question number one. So yeah, you're welcome to say a few words too before you answer the question. So
Yeah. Well, I do have a few slides to share because these are
sure.
excellent questions that you've prepared. And I agree
Yeah.
that what's happened with the protests in the street has really brought on a lot of interest that wasn't there before. I've noticed a real uptake, people
Yeah.
actively engaged. Now, I've been working on this for a few years, but only a couple of years ago did I take to social media. And at
Okay.
first, there were very few responses, maybe a few likes. Now, the difference is quite marked. Like people are really getting actively engaged to learn more about this subject. And I really see the
Yeah.
difference. So if you don't mind, I'll just share a few slides.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why you're here.
I'm
Yeah.
just, I'm just wishing I
Educate
brought,
us.
I'm just wishing I got myself a glass of water. You know what? I forgot to do that. But
Well,
anyway,
you can. You're welcome to do that if you would
oh,
like. Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll just see how far I get. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll share the first screen here, and I'm going to begin with your question
Yeah.
and how people usually look at this. Now, this is from the Middle East Forum, and they have a principle that they follow, and that the people who work with them are required to maintain. Now, you never hear Middle East Forum talking about doctrine at all, and they tend to attract counter-terrorist types, and they focus on what they call counterterrorism. And that's a very global term. But what bothers me is they always hold this stance that Islam is a 1400-year-old faith, and that Islamism is a century-old utopian political ideology that seeks to return to past glories by imposing medieval religious laws. This is a false division. There is no such division in Islam.
Okay.
Like I said, most of what they do is about counterterrorism, and it doesn't. Of course, it's good that they do this, but to take this attitude basically guarantees ongoing employment, job security for counterterrorists, because it doesn't acknowledge the fact that this is intimately tied to the doctrine itself. And in fact, one counterterrorist had scheduled oh, wonderful. My husband's bringing me a glass of water. Thank you, dear.
Okay. There you go. There you
Yes,
go.
yes. he had scheduled me for a podcast, and when he found out I was going to talk about the doctrine, he canceled the podcast. And he says radical Islam is the problem, moderate Islam is the solution. You tell me how you take the same doctrine for everyone and decide which is radical, which is moderate. You have to do that by looking at people. Now, what I talk about is not people. I talk about doctrine, because people vary incredibly. You know,
Yeah.
you talk to this Hindu, what is Hinduism? He'll say one thing. You talk to this
Yeah.
Christian about, they'll say another thing. And that this is very personal. What you need to do is look at the doctrine itself. And they say they promote the work of moderate Muslims. Well, how do they know what is a moderate Muslim? So I reject this.
Okay.
So
So there's no distinction between, yeah, because I know there's a lot of people that make that distinction between the Islamist and Islam, right? Like you just
yeah,
said.
well,
So
they're
you
not
reject it
Muslims.
all.
They're
Yeah.
not
What?
Muslims. Muslims
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
make this
No,
distinction.
that just to
No,
be
no,
clear. Yeah.
that's right.
So,
There is
okay.
only one Islam, right? And
Okay.
and here is the doctrine. Now you tell me, this is the doctrine. How is this not something that, say, the Middle East Forum would attribute to Islamists? All right. This is the primary doctrine. This is the Quran. The worst of creatures in the sight of Allah are those who have disbelieved. So that's you and me. All right.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
says that whoever is an enemy to Allah, all right, then indeed Allah is an enemy to them. Okay, so then it goes on to say, to completely link them, my enemies and your enemies. Do not take my enemies and your enemies. So the doctrine completely links the enemies of Allah to be the enemies of Islam, and therefore the Ummah, which is the global community of
Yeah.
Muslims. It states that we are the enemy because we are unbelievers. And Muhammad said, I have been made victorious with terror cast in the hearts of the enemy. And that's the unbeliever. And while I was sleeping, the keys of the treasures of the world were brought to me and put in my hand. Now, how do we say this is just religion? You know?
Yeah.
Okay. So having made the point that there's no difference between Islam and Islamism, I'll go on to show you how it's impossible to know who is so-called modern and who is not. Now, this is a very nice looking fellow. And just like Muhammad, he was very intolerant in Mecca, his first 13 years preaching there. And he wanted people to follow him. And he cursed their ancestors. He said they would burn in hell. This is not a nice neighbor, all right? So finally, after his protectors died, one of which was his wife, a very powerful woman. So when they died, then he was feeling the heat and felt he needed to migrate, and he did. He migrated to Medina, which was then called Yathrib, and he went there as a supplicant. He went there as someone who was saying, please help me. They are mean to me in Mecca. So in the early stages, that is what you get, because everything that is in the Quran and the Sunnah, the example of Muhammad, is true. So whether it's from the weak period or the strong period, it is all true. You can use it. So when Islam is weak, that is what you hear. And this man is in Vienna, and he's saying, as our faith commands, we preach tolerance and love. Well, it does say that, but towards fellow Muslims. And we measure our behavior against the exemplary life of the prophet. But most people don't know the life of the prophet, that he conquered all of Arabia by the sword. And when he died, he said there should not be an infidel left on the Arabian Peninsula. That is the exemplary life of our prophet. So the teachings of Islam are, most people have heard of the Quran. Most people are not aware of the Hadith. Now, these are on a par. You know, in different places in the Quran, it's like if you obey Allah and the messenger, they go together. So how do you know about the messenger? Well, the collected sayings and examples of what he wanted and what was done around him. So this is the life of Muhammad. But to put it all in context, you need to have a good biography. And there are many Bowdlerized biographies that are available on the internet now. And that's one thing I want to say, is that the world is very happy to have beautiful lies, but it gets very upset when it sees an uncomfortable truth. And when I look at the internet, I see pages and pages and pages of information that is factually incorrect, that paints a very rosy picture of Muhammad. For example, if you go to the Museum of Islam, the Islamic Museum in Melbourne, Australia, it has on the wall a biography of Muhammad. It talks about one wife, not the other 12. It doesn't
Right.
have a spot of blood on that wall. There is nothing on that wall about jihad. And it says something near the end about him being named man of the year, and how everybody loved him and came, as if it all happened by accident. And that's totally false. But you've got thousands of people going through that museum. So what were formerly trusted institutions are basically full of a lot of propaganda these days,
Yeah.
portraying Islam in a way that it never was historically, and in fact is not today. So the doctrine is dualistic, as I said, and not just because the early doctrine, which can be used, is intolerant but can be managed. It's not violent. The later doctrine is very violent. It's not in chronological order. So the only way to understand it is to put it in the context of the life of Muhammad. Now, this is from Ibn Ishaq, and that dates back to the 8th century. So this is a very good one, and it's not Baudelarized. But what people forget is that all of this doctrine is a source of pride for Islam. You cannot criticize it, unlike the West, which is always tearing down its own, its own doctrines, its own laws. But Islam does not do that. In fact, that's
Yeah.
blasphemy to get you killed in an Islamic country. So this is a source of pride. So there's no reason on earth for people not to talk about the doctrine. Now, I know that there are different organizations, and I think the Middle East Forum may be one of them, but they feel that it protects them legally if they separate Islamism somehow, okay? So that's something separate. Well, I'm not really saying anything bad about your religion, because people are so afraid to be critical of religion, but only this religion. And why is that? Is that some collective memory because of slavery, which is still ongoing? We never hear, for example, about the trans-Saharan slave trade. When you pick up a Canadian school book, I have one upstairs, it's an atlas, talks all about the Atlantic slave trade, but it doesn't talk about 1,400 years of slavery in Islam that is still ongoing in parts of the world. So if you go to Mauritania or Niger, you're going to find thousands of descendant slaves. Not so long ago, we had the Yazidis that were kidnapped and sold as slaves. Many of them are still in slavery. This is going on because it is allowed in the doctrine. So here we have the Quran and Sunnah. So when you say, well, what is Sharia? Well, Sharia is all of this. Everything that Muhammad said you could do or you couldn't do, or Allah said you could do, or that's all Sharia.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And I want to explain that also, for instance, Texas said it put a law out that we will not have Sharia here. Well, first you got to recognize what it is. And I think that may have even made Texas a target, because there is so much Sharia. They got Sharia cities going up in Texas now that they really don't know what to do with. And I was listening, there was an interview, and sometimes, you get little glimpses from the inside. And there's an organization called Memory that gets these, and if they're in Arabic, translates them. But this was a few Arab developers, and they're discussing this plan they have to now have an Islamic city in Michigan, and how they're going to do it. They buy a bunch of land, and because it's simply treated as a religion, not as a governance, which it is, they're going to buy a bunch of land and they're going to sell the lots. And the way to make it purely Islamic is that the fees, often these large developments, they have to have some kind of utility fees. All right, that 75% of the fee will go to the mosque, and that way people will not sign up for this if they're not Muslim, and they have a big mosque in the center of the city, and 75% of your administration fee has to go to the mosque. Well, that's going to ensure that it's Islamic. But I also wanted to show this because, when they talk about terrorists, and recently there was a report released in the UK And the report was noting the fact that ideology is so often ignored, and boy, is it ever ignored when it comes to, these counter-terrorists and national security. They don't want to touch ideology. No, that's forbidden because that's religion. All right. So what they had done was they'd gone to the homes of people who were identified as, Islamic terrorists. And that's another thing I'll point out, that, in a non-Islamic country, you're going to find 80 or 90% of the designated terrorists on the designated terrorist list for the country will be Islamic. And that's certainly the case in Canada. You can look it up online. It's right there. You look up designated terrorists in Canada and you'll see how many are Islamic. Well, when they collected all this reading material from these different terrorists, they talk all about these books, and they list these books, and they show these books, and they talk about them. What they don't say is that all of these books are based on the Quran. They're based on the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad, the Sharia, and there's a Quran in every Islamic home. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that all Muslims want to do this. What I am saying is that this is what the doctrine says. And
Yes.
about the global community, the stronger it gets, they don't have any choice either, because the power of the Ummah is, I'll get to that later. The social pressure within the Ummah is incredible. I'm glad I don't have to suffer from it, I can tell you that. So how do they finance this? Now, one of the things that we hear about is the wonderful charity of Islam. And, usually when you think of a charity, you think of it going to the poor, and that's the case with other religions. But with Islam, people don't realize that what it does is it sets up a parallel society, a parallel tax system. And when you look at it, it's just like looking at your own tax bill. There are 8 categories for the expenditure of the zakat that is collected. And now these organizations in Canada that are supposed to be charitable organizations and are often activist organizations, some of them are authorized to collect zakat, and these are given charitable tax receipts by our government, when really this is a form of governance that is foreign. So the money is spent for the poor and needy, yes. Also for those employed to collect it, so that's public service. For bringing hearts together, this is propaganda, the Ministry of Public Information. This is to sweeten hearts, bring people to Islam. And for freeing slaves or captives, those in debt, financial services, but largely, this is very important, is fi sabilillah. And this is the military. This includes activist groups, the cause of Allah, which is jihad, and the stranded traveler. So you see, this is where the funding comes from. And one of the largest trials ever, the Holy Land Foundation trial, was associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, who are the people, they were co-arranged, all right, the Hamas to start with, the charter, and also the Muslim Student Association. So, there's a lot of money involved. And this Holy Land Foundation trial discovered, millions of dollars were being sent off to Hamas to support a terrorist group, an Islamic terrorist group, jihadis, okay? And that's another thing, is that nobody wants to ever say the word jihadi, they or Sharia. No, they talk in very soft terms, nebulous terms that could mean anything, even when they're speaking about, what's happening with, the grooming gangs in the UK, they talk about Asians as if, this is not Asians, this is not Hindu, this is Islam. So to carry on with the zakat, the example, the 8 categories, as you can see, the 8 categories, and this is the 7th one. And it's obligatory to distribute zakat among them, 1/8 to each category. And the 7th category is for those fighting for Allah, meaning people engaged in Islamic military operations for whom no salary has been allotted, so they're volunteers. And you will find this in today's Islamic accounting manuals. So when you have Islamic finance and Islamic business, they are all generating this 2.5% that has to be paid. Now,
Wow.
this is an example. This is the National Canadian Council of Muslims. They're very well known. They're very active. They generate a lot of material that goes to schools. They lobby the government, and they endorse political candidates. Now, they are also authorized from the Canadian Council of Imams under the fi sabilillah category, which is jihad. All right, so there's stealth jihad, there's violent jihad, but this is the cause of Allah. And it says that
Right.
they offer legal services. They're successful in presenting the Muslim viewpoint in media by writing, editor, or by paid articles. Yeah, how many other that are just religions do anything like this? Okay.
Hmm.
So the highest authorities are Allah and Muhammad, and that's what I go with. Because, like in Islam, there's no pope, for example. There's all of these different categories. There's mullahs, there's sheikhs, there's imams, there's Islamic scholars. And basically, as long as they've got their training and not even necessarily that, then they're going to be qualified to go up to a politician and say, well, I have the support of the community. And they will, present themselves as representing the community, but just about anybody, if they've done the study, can do this. So there's no overriding sort of, no, you can't do that. So right now, like fatwas are everywhere, and they can be about prayer times, they can be about killing apostates, they can be about stoning women, they might even conflict with each other. So it's yeah. Whoops. Oh, where did I go there? Sorry. There. Oh,
That's okay.
no, I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. How
That's
did
all
I do
right.
that? All right. So what I wanted to say is, as I go through this, to show that this is the doctrine, okay, not people, this is the doctrine, and the doctrine will keep producing jihadis forever and ever, because that is what it's designed to do. Like
Yeah.
more than half of the doctrine. In fact, I'll quote Dr. Bill Warner here. He did a statistical analysis. You'll see a little bit more later on. And he showed that 64% of the Quran was about the non-Muslim. And it is not good news. Okay. It is very angry towards them and sometimes violent towards them. It does promote hatred towards them. And so, being somebody who likes to verify everything, I had my own Quran and I replicated that work. I know two other people who have replicated, and I can say with confidence 64% of the Quran is about the non-Muslim. And we should know what it says. We really should. And the thing is, Muslims themselves don't really have a lot of choice. And the measures of good and bad is sacred law, not reason. Okay, and that's not how the West usually looks at things. So what is jihad? And that is taken from this book here. This is a classic manual of Islamic law. And this is for the sake of convenience. This is used by a lot of scholars because, rather than having to go through all the hadith, all the things that Muhammad has said, and all of the Quran, for rules basically that are well known, all right, and well understood, there's a consensus about what it means. They're collected in this here. So how does it describe jihad? It says jihad means to war against non-Muslims. And this is to establish the religion. And it takes it from the doctrine. Fighting is prescribed for you, slay them wherever you find them, fight the idolaters utterly. That jihad is a communal obligation. So when enough people are performing it, it's no longer obligatory on the others. But it also says he who provides the equipment has himself performed jihad. So when you donate money or, other things, then that is also helping towards jihad. And if none of those concerned perform jihad, and it does not happen at
Excuse me.
all. Sorry?
Excuse me. Yeah, I just sneezed there. I'm sorry.
Ah, I thought you
Yeah.
said, okay. All right.
No, no.
So if none of these concerned perform jihad and it does not happen, then everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin if there was a possibility of having performed. So somebody has to be performing jihad at all times. And
Yeah.
I will tell you that just in the last couple of days, there were 27 Hindus killed in Kashmir. They were tourists. They were just, visiting Kashmir, and each one of them, the males, they pulled down their pants to make sure that they were Hindu, so they're not circumcised. And then they were killed, just like that. This is jihad going on every day around the world. There are websites I can send you to that keep track of this. And it is folly to ignore it. The
Yeah,
Quran says
100%.
fighting has been enjoined on you while it is hateful to you. So you see, this is the thing, that there is no reason in Islam. What Allah and Muhammad have said, that's it. It's for them to know. Allah knows while you do not. Perhaps you hate a thing, it is good for you, and you love a thing, and it is bad for you. Allah knows, you do not. So your average Muslim is encouraged to always seek information from people who have studied the Quran. So it depends very much on the attitude of the person that they're talking to. Okay, if you're talking to somebody who really wants to enforce the last chapters of the Quran, which is not in chronicle order, but the later verses of the Quran, then they're going to take their word for it. They have a lot of influence, and this is happening online, but it's certainly happening in mosques. And I'll just mention that a friend of mine, Steve Kirby, he does wonderful work, and he's written several books. And he recently analyzed, I was mentioning those memory videos that they've got of different Islamic events. Now, it's the tip of the iceberg. You don't get very many opportunities to get these events and record them, but they do. And he started with October 7th, 2023, and went through to February 15th, 2025. And in that period of time, he found 153 examples in the United States, and they're categorized by state, of, hateful rhetoric at Islamic events. 97 of those events were a Friday sermon.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on
Yeah.
in the mosque. Not all
Yeah.
of them, of course, but in
Well,
many
that's the command center, right? I mean, that's
it absolutely
basically,
is.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And then
should I
we're,
come out for a bit and let you talk for a while?
no, that's fine. Actually, it was interesting that you mentioned that they're trying to set up an Islamic city, you said in Michigan, and then the first thing that came to my mind was Dearborn, Michigan. I've
Oh
watched
yeah,
some of the demonstrations that they've performed there, and it's just mind blowing. I
yeah.
mean, you
The
can
Ashura
see the
Day,
videos. It's everywhere.
terrifying,
And
really. It's very
well,
terrifying.
it's they're using our own system against
Yes,
us, and it's like, how much warning do we have to, it's like kind of like the watchmen and watchwomen, like kind of like sounding the alarm, and it's like you guys are turning a blind eye. It's unbelievable. It's like you're handing over like the great Western heritage without even a fight. It's all being done from within, like using the
this is
system
a modern
against us.
phenomena. I mean, until
Yeah.
honestly, until I would say the First World War, maybe, Islam was simply considered as a civilizational threat. I mean, you had, the Ottoman Empire, and then
Yeah.
around 1948 we got the UN. And what did the UN try to do but involve all the Islamic countries? So
Yeah.
they, I should get to that in a moment. I'm going to forget what I was going to say about the Ashura parade, which is absolutely frightening. And yes, I have forgotten what I was going to say about the Ashura parade. Yeah, well, anyway, never mind. So that's what you see in Dearborn, Michigan. And I was going
Yeah.
to say that Quran 533 talks about war. All right. And if you look up the commentary, like, how do you define war? I mean, we've already defined enemy as simply someone who does not believe in Islam. That is the enemy. So how do you define war? War, okay, is to make war against Islam is simply, that includes the unbelievers, okay,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it also includes to take over the roadways, and it also includes to create fitna, okay, unrest in the land. Now this isn't allowed in an Islamic country. You start trying to create social unrest, you're going to be beheaded very quickly. So but they know full well, at least the organizers do. I certainly don't think that, every Muslim that's out there, they get caught up, in the rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
And they're fed like this, what they are told is so much of it is alarmingly deceitful. And there's so many booklets and things that are published that are incorrect as well. And then, the average Muslim reads it and they believe it. But the people who are organizing this, do I think they don't know? I doubt it. I think they know that if they did this in an Islamic state, that would be it, because this is considered war when you take over the streets, and we see the streets being taken over pretty much
Well,
every weekend these days.
I mean, yeah, like, and I'm going to weigh in on that because when we saw these freedom convoys, like, what did our government do? They enacted the War Measures Act to shut it down. And see, the reason I reference that because of what you just said, like taking over the streets, these pro-Pali, pro-Hamas, and they're violent. And like, yet, so far, I've seen very minimal action taken, like by our governments. And the reason I want to highlight that again is because, yes, like the government used the War Measures Act, which aligns with some of the things that you're saying. But of course, when it comes to these pro-Pali demonstrations, it's allowed. It's an abomination to me. And give me the power and they be shut down. No more of this. It's
Yeah, well,
enough.
that War Measures Act, it's been shown in a court of law that was unconstitutional.
Well, there you go, right? I mean, and I agree with that. But
Mhm.
like to me, the mindset behind that
Oh yeah.
was like kind of aligns with some of the points that you brought up. And
So
anyway,
again, now we're talking about what one person, basically the prime minister of the country, said, well, we need to do this. And of course, they have the office and it kind of all, I don't want to get too distracted, but
no, 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 yeah,
I do
that's
want to
fine. Yeah,
focus
let's
on the doctrine, not specific incidents,
yes, yes,
because
absolutely. Well, let's read
there are
off
so
question
many
number
factors
two.
in play when you have something like that. There are other factors as well. But I did also want to mention a couple of things. And oh no, where did it go? Uh, yeah, before we left that. Yeah, I mentioned about the National Canadian Council of Muslims, and I was talking about fitna in the streets. Fitna, is to cause unrest. Sometimes it has different applications. So when they talk about a woman and her voice being aura, sexual, okay, this is fitna. It creates sexual unrest. So these words are used in very strange ways sometimes, but
Hmm.
that's the reason they don't want the Afghan women on the street or speaking to people, is because their voice is considered like a sexual thing. And that's where Sharia is being enforced very strictly. So
Hmm.
it depends, like I said, on how strict the particular leader wants to enforce it. But it's a matter of governance. It's a way of exerting control, and the law is always there. It can always be used because it's always there. And the law is very brutal in many ways. Okay, when we see the beheadings and things like that, they're following Sharia. So I actually watched a court happening. It was a video of a court in Afghanistan, and it was with a woman, and they did actually rule in favor of the woman. There's no doubt they were following Sharia. I could see it. And what had happened was her husband had died, and the relatives not only were taking the inheritance that should have gone to her and the children, but they were also wanting to keep her there basically as their slave, and their father wanted to bring her home. And they went to the court, and this poor woman cowered in the corner, completely covered from head to toe, hoping it will go her way. And it did, because the in-laws had no right to inherit her. So while we
Hmm.
say that the Afghan women are being treated terribly, and they are being treated terribly, there's no doubt about that, they are still following Sharia because they ruled in favor of her and she went home with her father. But if that's the good news, good grief, what kind of a life is that,
Yeah. No, I
So
mean,
yeah. So I wanted to say that this fitna creating unrest, and often that comes about by uniting with other groups that are upset about things. And we see this happening on quite a regular basis. I won't list them all. But for example, the National Canadian Council of Muslims has allied with the Sikhs, the World Sikh Organization, in the last couple of years. And that's because it's felt that they have a common grievance. And this is, of course, how the Sikhs look at it. Well, how much do the Sikhs know about Islam? Maybe that not that much. But if you have common enemy, and that is the state, and you want more you want more demands coordinated and things like that, then you get together and you have this alliance. But what they may not realize is that Islam is absolutely nothing like Sikhism, nothing at all. It like Sikhs, it's not a theocracy, it's not supremacist. They have no concept of the unbeliever, the kafir, as being evil. They don't kill apostates. They have no command to violence or taxation. They don't force conversions. They have gender equality. They don't have polygamous marriage. So they have virtually nothing in common with Islam except a beef against the government. And so they've aligned, and this is how groups align that really maybe shouldn't be aligning, and they are, because they know so little about what they're aligning with, and also not understanding that alliances are temporary. According to Sharia law, that an alliance is temporary. It should not exceed 4 years, and definitely not more than 10. And it's for a strategic purpose. All right. It's like, and it can be broken at any time. The first verse of Quran chapter 9, it says that these agreements, that none of these agreements with Kafirs are binding on you. And it stems from when Muhammad had an agreement with the Meccans, and it was a 10-year agreement. And after 2 years, he broke it on a very slim excuse that somebody he was allied with had fought with somebody they were allied with, and therefore the whole thing's off and I'm coming in. So, and I also want to say that, when we use all of this fuzzy language about terrorists, and we don't specify who we're talking about when we're talking about jihadis, that you can't defeat what you can't name. And the language after about 2008, until about 2008, after 9/11, the language, there was a lot of training about, jihadis, and it was in the US particularly, the CIA and that was virtually expunged around 2008 when Obama came in. And I know people who were working there then, who were giving training, and that's what happened. And all of that the terminology changed completely. So, that's part of why people, I think, are afraid to talk about the doctrine when they shouldn't be, because like I say, it's a source of pride for Islam. So by all means, talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive into Sharia and how that's being
Yeah,
implemented then.
sorry, really.
I know, I mean, I know you're a wealth of knowledge, and this is really important because you're an educator, and
I just really need to tighten it up a bit, or we're never going to get
sure,
through.
yeah, yeah. Well, we can move it along. Yeah, like basically, we've talked a little bit about Sharia. I mean, you've given us an explanation of what that
Yeah.
really is and how
Well,
is that being
what
implemented
I
here.
want to show is that everything in life is covered by Sharia, and it falls into like legal, moral, and ethical, all of it. And it is either obligatory, and these are the categories in Islam. It's obligatory, you have to do it because Muhammad said you have to do it, or Allah said you have to do it. Or it's recommended because he liked it. It's permitted because it went on all around him and he didn't say anything. Discouraged because he didn't particularly care for it, and sometimes he forbid it. And the word Sharia is specifically in the Quran. That word exactly is in there once. There's something like it another time, but the word Sharia is in Quran 45:18. And it is the example of Muhammad. We have set you on the clear way. So this is the deen, the way of life of Islam. So follow it. Do not follow the desires of those who do not know the truth. So Sharia is clearly in the Quran, and it's all of it. So some of the principles people don't understand. So we're talking about what is Sharia law and how is this being implemented in Canada? Well, it's being implemented a lot more than it needs to be, because there is a principle, a well-known principle in Islam, and that is the principle of darura. And that means necessity overcomes obligation and makes the forbidden permissible. So if all that's the food that's around is not halal, you can go ahead and eat it because you need to eat. If the finance is not Islamic finance, you can go ahead and use it because that's all the finance there is and you need a loan. But the Islamic scholars will tell something else to our leaders. They won't tell them about Darura. And they'll say, well, we have to have it. It's a religious obligation and therefore it's a right. And so they knowing nothing about this other, like here we have it, Darura is mentioned specifically in the Quran 5 times. So it isn't something that has to be approved, but our authorities go ahead and do it because they're relying on advice from people who want to facilitate Sharia. And another thing our leaders don't realize is that deception is also a well understood principle in Islam, is that war is deceit. Muhammad said so. And that there is no harm in giving a misleading impression if it is required by an interest countenanced by sacred law. That outright lying is permissible in 3 cases. You can lie to your wife, that's just fine. Or you can say something nice to settle a disagreement, whether it's true or not. And the deception is permissible to lie when the goal is permissible and obligatory if the goal is obligatory. So this makes it very difficult when you say, well, we know who the moderate Muslims are. I ask again, how do you know? Because of this doctrine, which I find this doctrine hateful, really, because it makes it so impossible for people to trust each other. But that's baked into the doctrine as well. The doctrine, it says that you must not ally with anyone who is a non-Muslim, that if you do, that you are one of them, and that they cannot be trusted, that they only wish you harm. And so this makes it very, very difficult for people to get together. So here is how halal works in a non-Islamic country. So you have the migration, and that is also doctrinally mandated, Muhammad said after Mecca, the conquest of Mecca, there is no hijra, migration, only jihad. That's what he said. So you have the migration, then you have the demand for halal. Then you have halal certification. So this is a Canadian company. They make gelatin capsules, and they probably paid about $2,500 for that halal certification. They'll have to follow all the Sharia rules. So there we got Sharia in Canada. You never thought about it. There it is. We've got Sharia in Canada. They pay the fee. And of course, that contributes sales, and the unbeliever pays for this. They pay for the sales. Now we have profits and assets. This generates zakat, which finances jihad.
Yeah, it's really witty the way that you've I like that. That's good. I mean,
Yeah.
explain,
Well,
define halal. Like define halal. What is halal?
that just means permitted. Slavery
Okay.
is halal.
Okay.
Okay.
So permission. Yeah. Okay.
Allowed if it's allowed. Yeah. So then we have Islamic finance in Canada. Little old Canada, 10th the size of the States, nevertheless has the largest halal expo in North America is in this country. We are awash in it. So the thing is that you've got non-Muslims also contributing because it is presented as socially responsible and ethical investing. And they're wanting to be good, multicultural things, and they'll come along and support all of this. They have no idea what they're supporting, really, because it will finance jihad, ultimately. And there are many ways to do this. So here we have an app, and this is Muslims have an app, and this is part of marketing so that they will select halal items. And in contrast, now this is, for shopping, grocery shopping, to the traditional view that halal was primarily related to slaughter methods. It is now widely accepted that halal integrity must be maintained throughout the entire supply chain. So this is an emergence of a new market, which really kind of began with Iran back after the revolution. They said, no, we don't want any more of this meat brought in, all prepackaged and everything. Send us the cattle because we're going to slaughter it ourselves. That's where it began. But boy, has it expanded since then. So now the market, Saudi Arabia signs a $1.86 billion deal with Nestle's. So they are building industries that are halal from start to finish, even the glue on the label. Everything must be produced. So what does that do to this parallel civilization? What does that do to their marketing, to their finance, to their system of governance when you've got Sharia courts? It's a parallel government. Certifiers can be found for almost any method. And once something is certified, now you're a good Muslim if you buy halal certified. And it's farm to fork. And here's just an example from this book is available through the UN. And from farm to fork, everything they want: the farm, the animal food, the standard slaughter, the certification, the processing, labeling, marketing, logistics, the ingredients, every additive, wholesale, retail, all of it halal from beginning to end. And I must say that what there is in the Quran about what a person should eat, you could put in a paragraph. It's practically nothing. It has been magnified so that now you can buy halal fingernail polish. And of course, the Muslims are encouraged to do that because there it is.
Yeah. I mean,
So then we're on to,
question number 3, right? So
yeah,
like, thoughts on what do you know? What can you tell us about Hamas, Hezbollah, and the IRGC in Canada?
yeah. Boy, do I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation.
Uh, It's about
So,
you ultimately. Yeah, it really is about you, and honestly, the work you've done. It's yeah. We're
so, so, like I said, we've got, our counter-terrorists saying, well, we want to deal with radicals, we want to deal with terrorists, we want to deal with extremism, right? So when you go to the Canadian website, okay, this is our government, the National Strategy on Countering Radicalization to Violence, right? What do they identify as indicating violent extremism? What are the identifiers? Okay, pressure to conform, superiority, isolation and separation, ideologically driven, perceiving a threat. This is all Islam, all of it. The pressure to conform within the Ummah is incredible. If there is an Islamic, and of course it depends on the size, but the larger the group grows, the more that, you could call it bullying, absolutely, because I mean,
yeah
people have left Islam at risk to their life, because they couldn't take it. I was at a meeting quite a number of years ago, I guess 2019, and I was talking to a woman there about Islam and women. And just like I'm talking to you now, and suddenly I hear a voice over my head say, I'm a Muslim. So I turned and looked at him and I said, am I right? And he said, yes, you are. And then he told me a story, right? That he had to escape Saudi Arabia because he knew the doctrine very well and he couldn't accept it, you know. But to not accept it is very difficult. It is not easy to step outside of the Ummah. So, and I mean, it's been going on for 14 centuries. It's very difficult. So,
yeah
I have sympathy for sure. And Islam is quite definitely a supremacist religion, and it is the goal of Islam is to be the belief for the whole world that all will be subject to Islam, and that's no secret. That is the goal, and in
yeah
fact, kufr, it's disbelief to deny that. Every Muslim knows that this is supposed to be and however that is attained. So the isolation, I think everyone is well aware of, and people say, oh, well, we have these Islamic ghettos, you're not trying hard enough. There's 13 verses in the Quran that insist that the Muslim not take non-Muslims as friends. Okay.
yeah. I
And
mean, it just like I want to weigh in just a little bit on that one. I mean, it's very parasitical in nature, very deceptive, like you said, and I feel like you're exposing the deception of Islam for what it is and how they are actively using our system against us to overthrow us, and I mean it's very clear with what you're showing, and the words that come to my mind are like, Dar al-Harb versus Dar al-Islam, because they say, oh, Islam is a religion of peace. Yeah, when it's under Islamic rule, it is a religion of peace, but even there it's debatable. But Dar al-Harb is considered to be the land of the kafir, right? Like it's basically the non-believer, which would be
that
here.
that 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 would be Dar al Kufr. And some people use that term as well, the kafir, kufar, kufar,
Okay.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard both terms used, and that is it's not necessarily what it means is that it's under non-Islamic rule. That's what matters.
Yes.
Okay, because it can be majority kufr, but if it's ruled by Islam, then it is still Dar al-Islam. If they have
Okay.
the doctrine says, do not be weak and sue for peace when you have the upper hand. So as it gets stronger, as it is now in Bangladesh, and I'd also like to point out that, you know, while our authorities want to talk to the mullahs and the sheikhs and the imams and the whole long list of them, who is it that was in that to this day is enforcing the Sharia in Iran that has
Yeah.
the highest number of executions in the world and always does? Okay, and you know these are the people who were inciting the hatred, and then in Syria now we started out with the jihadis, but as soon as they got control, they're working hand in hand with the mullahs. Now they immediately introduce the Sharia, and the mullahs are sitting right there beside them. And Canada sends 85 million to Jelani when we have just had thousands of,
Yeah.
because they emptied the prisons. Out came all the jihadis. They've now slaughtered the Christians and Alawites by the
Yeah.
score. And we've just sent them millions of dollars. Like, what are we doing?
It's an abomination. Yeah, I mean, you are the voice of warning to me, to the Canadian government. Like you really are. I believe that. And I
So
mean, it's, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
yeah, I just want to say that there's a lot of different methods. Okay, so it's not all
Yeah.
violent. There's infiltration. There's diplomacy. Well, you
Yeah.
see, now the Muslim Brotherhood started like about 100 years ago, roughly. And like I said, you know, the first organization they started in the United States was the Muslim Student Association, and of course, those kids are encouraged, you know, to push Sharia. You know, like chastise a fellow Muslim, you know, girl if she's not wearing her hijab in the United States. And how do you score political points within these organizations? Well, it's by pushing jihad. And so this is what I call jihad light, or sorry, jihad Sharia. Sorry, my mistake. Sharia light, because Sharia in the West is not at all like Sharia in an Islamic state. And
Mhm.
you know, they are going to be very, very surprised if the country does turn into an Islamic state. It's like, careful what you wish for, because they don't want to live in an Islamic state, but they want to have this superior sort of, gee whiz, you know, I'm a good Muslim, I'm wearing my hijab, and I'll get to that in a minute. But at the same time, it's a very slippery slope. So and diplomacy goes a lot farther, you know, when Islam is weak than anything else. You know, I mean, the terrorists, who needs to worry about them? Frankly, I mean, yes, they're going out and murdering people, but you can see them clearly, and
Yeah.
there are others that you cannot see clearly at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. Yeah.
So I did want to show, because you know I've gone ahead and said that I need to show that this is in the doctrine. So conformity 3:110, you are the best nation as an example for mankind. You enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong. Superiority, inferiority of others. And there are many examples. I've just given one here, okay, for each one for the sake of an example. So about the Muslims, they who have disbelieved will be in the fire of hell, and they are the worst of creatures. But the very next verse says, about Muslims, you who have believed and done righteous deeds, righteous for Islam, those are the best of creatures. So we have the superiority, the conformity, isolation from non-Muslims. Do not take the Jews and Christians as allies. Whoever is an ally to them, indeed, he is one of them. Ideological violence. Fight those who do not believe in Allah in the last day, do not consider unlawful what Allah and Muhammad have made unlawful, who do not adopt Islam, Sharia, from those who were given the scripture, fight till they pay the jizya tax and are humbled, and they have to be humbled. That's important. And Muhammad said, I've been commanded to fight the people till they testify none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and non-Muslims are portrayed as a threat. Do not take as them other than yourselves. They will not spare you any ruin. They wish you hardship. Hatred has already appeared in their mouths, and what their breasts conceal is greater. So non-Muslims are portrayed as very evil, hateful, wanting only harm for Islam's. Muslims, and they're taught this from the cradle on. I have a baby naming book that emphasizes this, and it's just, you've got to get past that belief that people have had all their life, that you mean them harm. And of course, this is definitely, a friend of mine said, really, the Quran is more like, she's been in the military all her life. She said it's more like a military manual. You encourage
Yeah,
your troops to hate the enemy so that they will go in and fight better, right?
sure.
So, and again, this is Dr. Bill Warner, and this quote is from the Hadith, and we hear about the 5 pillars of Islam, but there's actually 6, and one of them is jihad. This says 5. I command you with 5 that Allah commanded me: listen and obey, Sharia, jihad, hijrah, that's the migration, and the prayer. All right. And you hear people say, oh, well, you're misinterpreting. No, you're not. You can go to the commentaries of the Quran and you'll see clearly what it says. Those interpretations are already there. And when you read Bukhari, this entire collection is called Sahih, which is the absolute best. All right. When you read it, 98% of the hadith about jihad are violent. So,
Yeah,
it's, and I want to point out again that in Mecca, all right, there was no violence, intolerance, but no violence. But when you get to Medina, now a quarter of that Quran, those chapters is devoted to jihad. And the life of Muhammad, 2/3 of it is devoted to jihad. So this is the doctrine. This isn't some strange Islamist. This doctrine's been around 1400 years. And it began in the mosque. The first thing Muhammad did when he got to Medina was to build a mosque. Okay. And that was used as
hmm,
a place to plan battles and to bring dignitaries, and
yeah,
he punish people on the doorsteps. And we have these sort of things going on, and store weapons, absolutely. And we have these sort of demonstrations going on in mosques all the time, besides the sort of rhetoric I was telling you about. But this is from Lebanon. They found this inside a mosque, and this is no surprise. Okay, these are armaments for
yeah.
war. So,
No, it's you make a really good case, right? And I think that's really important, the warning you're given, because this needs to be addressed for what it is. And it's great. So I'll read off question number 4. It gives me a little bit
yeah, please do.
of that. Yeah, and no, it's really good. And I'm really hoping, I pray, our leaders take a look at your work and not turn the blind eye, because they need to understand what's written. Like, you've done the work for them and you're highlighting it. And like, it needs to be looked at like for what it is.
There's no
So
fiction.
basically, okay, yeah, like, so what's your take on the Free Palestine protests going on in the country? Should the government shut them down? Like largely due to the blatant anti-Semitic rhetoric. I mean, that's one of the wavelengths that are going throughout that crowd. There's multiple forces at work within, like, protesters, right? I mean, they're not necessarily all under the same banner. But I mean, from what I've seen and some of the stuff, like, as the numbers grow, and like you mentioned too, as the crowd grows, it's very interesting when I've even seen some of the Hezbollah, even some Hamas flags. I think that's relatively kind of like disappeared now because they pushed that line. But yeah, like tell us, what do you think about all this? What should be done?
Okay, making a note to myself because I didn't want to forget it. All right. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, they should be shut down. They should, I mean, no question they should be shut down.
Okay.
Their absolute hatred calls for death. I mean, from the river to the sea. When the Ottoman Empire fell, okay, there needed to be one little tiny slice of land where the Jews were safe, and the Islamic countries, which were also formed at that time, okay, Lebanon, etc. They were all part of the Ottoman Empire. Israel wasn't sort of carved out of nothing. We had Syria. All of those were established with boundaries. Well, they were all sending their Jews there, okay, because the Brits and the Americans were supposed to be establishing a mandate so the Jews could rule this little tiny sliver of land. So they were sending the Jews there. But at the same time, a lot of Muslims were emigrating there as well because, oh, they didn't want to lose this little sliver of land, right? So a whole lot of those Muslims that are in Palestine now, well, Palestine, in Israel, all right, they came at about the same time as, countries were sending some of the Jews there, including but the point about Israel is if you go to Jerusalem and you stand on the Mount of Olives, you are looking at a cemetery that is over 3,000 years old. This is their homeland. They are not oppressors, okay? This is their homeland. So it's just ridiculous what is going on in our streets. And I mean, the Jewish people have never done anything like this in this country. The Jewish people have done nothing but build this country. They have not taken, attack this country ever in any way. They've contributed. And, I think many are even jealous of their success, but they work hard. And to allow this to go in our streets, to terrorize people, the history of the Jewish people is one of a people that have been chased around the globe and oppressed in so many places, and honestly, I am beside myself that this is happening in Canada. So, I never would have dreamt anything like that. It's anyhow, to get back to it, the point is that they understand full well what they're doing. At least the organizers do. Like I already said, from their perspective, we look at it our perspective and we try to say this is freedom of speech, even when they're calling, for if there's a Jew behind a tree, then, kill him. This is straight from the doctrine. And like I said, Islam is very proud of its doctrine. It's no secret. We should be able to talk about it, of course. But when they're shouting this in the street, it's this is, calling for a genocide of the Jewish people. And we try to look at it from our perspective instead of the Islamic perspective, because how you interpret something, how we interpret something as being good, and how Islam interprets something as good is entirely the opposite. So when they're doing this, how do they define war? They define war. Islam defines war as taking over the streets, as causing fitna. So from an Islamic perspective, they are actually, in fact, creating war here. They are executing war in the streets. And for our leaders, okay, our leaders recognize war when it is a declaration from a nation state, but they do not realize that the doctrine, Islamic doctrine itself, is a declaration of war against the unbeliever, and particularly the Jew. So they're not looking at that, and they need to. So that's my take on these protests.
Yeah. I mean, I know like some of the counter arguments, of course, they accuse Israel of committing, genocide in the Gaza Strip. But my take on that too is, when you've got these jihadi, I'm going to call them animals, the way I look at them, they have their tunnel systems, they stage in homes, they stage in mosques, they stage wherever they can. And it's almost like a psychological strategy. It's very difficult for Israel to,
Hospitals,
hospitals as well. And I mean,
schools.
they've built up the entire strip,
Yeah.
like for war against Israel instead of, I've heard some really good arguments that they could have used the money, to build a little Dubai on the Gaza Strip, but instead it was all about terror tunnels, all about grooming the young children
Oh,
for
yeah.
war against Israel. And I mean, these are all choices like their leadership have made, like the way I look at it. So
While some of the leadership have got billions and they're sitting in Dubai.
exactly. Yeah. So like it is staged. And I mean, to me, I'm just going to weigh in. I mean, they've been largely successful at turning a huge percentage of like Western minds against Israel because of what's happened. And to me, that's a tactic in and of itself. Because I look
Yeah.
at these jihadis, they'll sacrifice the entire population if they can succeed in turning the world against Israel. And to me, like that's what's being done. And
Well,
it's
from the mindset of those who want to pursue this, war is deceit. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
I'll tell you that the Muslim Brotherhood, all right, in their writings, we'll get to that. They said 4 decades ago, that they were going to make Palestine, Israel, the center, the focal point for an Islamic Renaissance. An Islamic Renaissance. They've had 4 decades, okay, to get
yeah,
into the schools, to put out propaganda that has resulted in what we are seeing now. Like we have been asleep at the switch. We didn't realize what was going on. We didn't realize what was being taught in the schools. And
Yeah.
we haven't had people who are qualified there to say, no, this isn't right. But you know who's qualified? People who have lived under Islam. Why don't you get an Egyptian Coptic Christian to come and look at some of those papers that we're putting into our schools? Because that's the perspective we should always take, is that of the non-Muslim, because this is not an Islamic state.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So sorry, did I cut you off? Did you want to say
No, no,
anything?
no, 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 that's fine. Yeah, no, we'll carry on. We're
I just wanted
still,
to show this. This is
yeah,
more of Dr. Bill Warner's statistics. All right. The
yeah,
proportion of Jew hatred, which is greater than Mein Kampf. And it's particularly in the Quran after the migration to Medina, because while there weren't any Jews, barely a Jew, maybe one traveling through Mecca, okay, that was Arab. Medina had 3 tribes of Jews. And when he got there, he was sure they were going to accept him as a prophet and go, oh, aren't you wonderful? But that isn't what happened. They're going, no, we think you're a fake, all right? And he really hated that. He really resented that. And so he started getting angry. And that, you see, the thing with Muhammad, when you put the Quran in chronological order and parallel it to his life, you will see that the revelations in the Quran occur in tandem with his life. So when he first got to Medina, and the the Meccans aren't following him like or the Jews aren't following him like he thought they should, he's saying, look, at these are your scriptures. Your scriptures said, you were the best of people. And so what is going on here? You haven't listened to a lot of your prophets. You're not listening to me. All right. And you have changed your scriptures because your scriptures foretold me coming, and you're going to burn in hell. So, there's a progression, and he's quite shocked. Well, ultimately, those 3 tribes of Jews, which were half the town, they were half of Medina, were gone. Within 5 years, okay, this man who arrives as a supplicant saying, please, I need help, and builds a mosque. Within 5 years, 2 tribes had been exiled, one of which went to Khyber, who he chased down later and slaughtered many of them and demanded tribute from the others, okay? 2 were exiled, the 3rd were executed. And every single male Jew was beheaded, okay, between 600 and 900 men in a single day. So you want to talk about genocide. This is genocide. There were no Jews left in Medina after 5 years. So what he said, and now this is from the book Ibn Kathir from the 8th century. And this is when he followed the Jews that had been exiled and gone to Khyber. So when he attacked there, he divided the property, the wives, children of the Bin Qurayza forts and castles in which they were. That's what they were called. He cast terror in their hearts. Terror is big in Islam. Some you slew, some you captured. He killed the men, captured the women and children who were sold as slaves, and caused you to inherit their land and their dwellings and their property and a land you had not trod. Okay, so this is the expansion of Islam. And then people will go on about the Crusades. And I will tell you that the Crusades are a fraction of the attacks that were against all of those communities. And I'm talking the Zoroastrians, the Hindus, the Christians, the Jews. They've all been attacked. It's estimated there's 80 million Hindus that have died owing to jihad. So Muhammad said the last hour will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews. The Muslims shall kill them all. If a Jew hides behind a stone or a tree, the stone or tree will say aloud, "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him." On his deathbed, he gave the orders to respect and give gifts to the foreign delegates, and that works a treat. That's part of the zakat, okay, to sweeten the hearts. Respect and give gifts to the foreign delegates as you have seen me dealing with them, and expel the pagans. That's all non-Muslims from the Arabian Peninsula. And when they tell you there's politics, tell them this is Islam. We do not know the separation of religion and politics. That's Hassan al-Banna from the beginning of the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the founders. So what they say, fitna is terrorism in an Islamic state, but useful in others. And from their explanatory memorandum, the Muslim Brotherhood, now this was submitted as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, this enormous, all of these charities giving money to Hamas. And what they wrote is the process of settlement, all right, in the United States and elsewhere, is a civilizational jihadi process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, that's brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. How do you do that? You get positions, okay, of influence.
Yeah.
And that might be in publishing, okay? It could be anywhere. And sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, the hands of the believers, so it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. It's supremacists. And they have many organizations they're affiliated with, and you see the one highlighted there. You probably can't see this. I'm waving a book at you. And this is written by Jasmine Zine. It's called Canadian Islamic Schools. And in the introduction, she thanks this one here, the Islamic Institute for Islamic Thought. She says for their generous support and their generous funding. So, you know, this is an affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this woman is very powerful. She's in our school. She's got a lot of credentials, and that's where the support comes from. Okay. And I'm not saying it's her only support, but this is the conflict. Okay. Because this is not good for Canada.
No, not at all. And I'm glad you highlighted that, because this is what our leaders need to see. Like they need to see that. And to me, you know, we deserve like an answer to what's being done, you know, behind the scenes in the Islamic world, you know, even set up in Canada here. These things need to be answered and addressed. Like in a with a a dignified response, you know. Don't be cowards, you know, like the leaders. You're cowards. I call Canadian leaders cowards. 100% in my view. 100% coward. And this is part of the reason why we're being undermined, because you'd rather stick your heads in the sand and ignore all the evidence. Like you're bringing the evidence, right? I mean, this isn't stuff you've just made up.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at the doctrine, you're looking at the theology, you're looking at the books, all the information is there, right? And yet, you know, it doesn't fit their little paradigm, right? Like, because to me, what you're bringing is paradigm shifting, and it'll destroy, you know, their little house of cards, you know, that's been built. But let's
Well,
go on to question number 5. Yeah, because we need
yeah,
to.
yeah. And I just want to say about politicians, all right? Like, I wouldn't want to be one. And can
Well,
you imagine the hornet's nest? For example, well, I'll probably get to that later, is just about a week ago, I noticed the graduating class, well, that called to the bar, and this is in the UK. So the lawyers that are called to the bar, this is very prestigious, very influential, lots of connections and network. And this is at Lincoln's Inn for that. So this is the very top echelon. And there's hardly an Englishman in the class. And I'm looking at this. Someone had sent it to me, and I made a little post about it. And I just asked them questions like, where are the English, right? It was a
yeah,
firestorm. You cannot believe the lawyers, and Jewish lawyers too, that went absolutely crazy about daring to ask the obvious. How dare you ask the obvious? And,
yeah,
you know, I said, you know, how many British lawyers do you have who are studying Sharia so that they can go to Islamic countries and try to bring in democracy? Okay.
yeah.
So that it was like 159,000, you know, views in like 2 days. Just absolutely outraged that you should be asking such a question. But I do ask such a question because this is influence, and these are the people who end up talking to our leaders. So what can we expect to happen? They have been, you know, dawad is what you call to go out and proselytize about Islam. And not only that, they are inoculated against people like me because they're already told in advance, okay, there are these Islamophobes, and they're you know, don't talk to them because they just hate Muslims. I don't hate anybody. I don't like this
No, no.
doctrine, it's for darn sure, but I don't hold individuals responsible for something that was created 1400 years ago and that people are compelled to follow. Okay, so you know there's no freedom of religion in Islam. They don't really have a choice, but when it becomes more powerful, trying to resist it is pretty much impossible. But anyway, so to get on to this, so they need to, okay, so they're in a precarious position and they don't have good information. So they're afraid to say anything. So are you going to say there's a problem when you don't have a solution to introduce? You know, it's like
Yeah.
they don't have any idea. I mean, I was speaking with an MEP in the EU. Okay, so that's the minister of the European Parliament, right? And I won't say which one, but I was speaking with one, and you know, there he is in Belgium, and there had just been an attack the day before. And you know what he said to me, and this is someone who's concerned about the funding of the mega mosques. And I'll tell you, in Canada, there is absolutely no tracking. Anybody, foreign funding to our universities is just fine. Nobody's keeping track of that. In the States, they're supposed to report it, but they don't report half of it. There's been some investigation done into how little of it they are actually reporting because it's in the billions. But in Canada, there's no requirement to report it at all. And I got off track there.
Yeah, no, just let me jump in just real quick because I want to read off the question too for those who are just listening. So like basically question number 5 is, do you think government officials need to define the boundaries of freedom of religion due to the mass influx of multiculturalism ideologies in Canada? And one other thing I'm just going to add as a side note, I mean, I know our ex-Prime Minister Trudeau, about 10 years ago, he talked about how Canada has no mainstream uh,
Yeah, that
any
was ridiculous.
yeah, no mainstream, no core identity.
That's
And he
it.
said it was the first post-national state. And I've been bringing that up a lot recently because to me, that is exactly what I'm going to call the New World Order or the globalist mindset is for this country here. So I guess I wanted your thoughts on, like, should
Well,
we define freedom of religion? Like, where are the boundaries? And especially when you're bringing up a lot of the points you bring up in Islam, what do we need to do about this? So,
well, to get back to that EU MEP, he says, well, you know, it's getting better. And I said, how is it getting better? How is it getting better? And he
yeah,
said, well, the media are starting to report on it. Now, the UN, all right, puts out guidelines for media. And, you know, these large corporations put out guidelines for media, what they're allowed to talk about, what they're not allowed to talk about. So people like me, what we're saying gets suppressed. All right. And this comes
yeah,
right from the top. This starts at the UN and works its way down. All right. And so the the impression I got from him is that it's getting better and somehow it's going to fix itself. And you know, it's not going to fix itself because this was introduced owing to the mass migration. Now, I'm not talking about people again. I'm just saying that there was a large cohort of Islam, which made it very powerful, that arrived pretty much all at once. So it's got a lot of influence that way. For instance, in Poland, there's a little tiny group of Islamic group. Okay. The Poland, when they came, they were allowed to have land. They were allowed to live there so long as they could not hold a government position. They could not interfere in politics because it was understood that was back in the 14th century what Islam could do. And so they have actually integrated fairly well, but they are 0.1% of the population. We're up to about 5%, 0.1% of the population. And owing to Poland's very strict immigration laws and their own laws, that group has not expanded. But it's not because of the religion, it's because of the circumstances, because one of the things Muhammad stressed was patience, all right? The doctrine doesn't change. The doctrine is always going to be the same. And Poland suddenly had a large population like what has happened in Canada and totally ill-equipped to deal with it. You know, people will say, well, I need this owing to my religion. And there was a case a few years ago, around 2019, I think, and there was a big headline in the Toronto Sun saying another triumph for Sharia. And there was a couple of men who had been rather pressured to involve themselves in an Islamic loan that wasn't a loan because it's not exactly done the same way. It's not a loan, it's an investment. So that is how they were going to get a mortgage for their house anyway. So it's more complicated. It's certainly not better than the financial system we have now. Anyway, so they were robbed, basically, and they went to court. Now they're going to a Western court, but they've involved themselves in Islamic transaction. So our court was totally ill-equipped to deal with that. So what did she do? She called on an Islamic advisor, okay, in regards to finance, who said, no, that's what they have to do. They have to go with Islamic finance, and this is a requirement, a principle or a pillar, I think it was, of our religion. And it is no such thing. It is not, okay? But that's what she believed, and she ruled against the plaintiffs. So basically, she enforced Sharia. And this is, you know, the inadequacy, people going before tribunals, going before their own employer and saying, I have to have this, that, and the other, and they have no idea. Is this right or is this not right? Does the person asking know if it's right or not right? Because they could have been informed by one of these activist organizations and given a slant on some doctrine or some information left out of some doctrine. For example, you know, demanding a beard. Okay, I need to have a beard. I'm a Muslim. You let me have a beard at work, so I won't be able to wear that mask or whatever. But, you know, it doesn't say anything about the beard in the Quran. It does in the Sunnah of Muhammad, but not in the Quran. But the Quran does say that you need to kill the infidel. So, you know, how much of the Quran are our tribunals going to approve? How far does it go? Because it's a complete civilization. So yes, there need to be boundaries. There needs to be a clear definition, and it needs to be consistent with our Charter of Human Rights. And Islam is not.
And
So,
see, that's right there when you mention the Charter of Rights. I mean, see, when you have like our own prime minister, ex-prime minister now saying we have no core identity, no mainstream, first post-national state, in my thinking, this is why we have all the problems we do now, because it's like a globalist kind of mentality and a globalist state. And like the traditional minded Canadian, like we're being phased out. And like the chaos that's brought in now is because of the mindset of, to me, some of the liberal leaders out there that have brought this upon us. And they look at themselves as like these heroes, when to me all they've brought is like a tremendous amount of problems. And it's going to be a battle for governance now, the way I see it. Like you know, you're highlighting Islam as a system of governments, and yes, they are fighting hard, I would say to basically subjugate, you know, the entire Western world. I mean, is how I'm seeing it, especially with what's going on in the UK. But anyway, let's carry on. Yeah, that's my little bit of a
so,
rant.
so the thing is, you know, the hijab is a very visible symbol
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Islam.
yeah,
And there was a woman who was supposed to be one of the world's experts on the hijab, and she was called upon as a panelist in a conference that was being held in Italy. And I signed on to this thing a few years ago with a question. All right. And I wasn't there for the whole thing because of the time thing, but I was there to listen to her. And I said to her, after she'd finished talking about how, you know, the women needed to wear the hijab, and, you know, it was Islamophobia not to let them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when she was finished, we were allowed to put in questions. I wasn't sure if they would read it, and they did. And I said, this is the Quran, and I'll read it to you now.
yeah.
It says, tell your wives, daughters, women of the believers to draw their cloaks over their bodies, cover themselves completely except the eyes and one eye to see the way. Now, you see, this is brackets. This has been put in, all right? And the reason it's put in, I took this from the Halali Khan translation. So when you look up the commentary about this verse here, you'll find that there are hadith of Muhammad that say that only the hands should show. He's got one hadith that says that. So that isn't actually in the original Arabic, but it's been added as a way of commentary. So that they should cover themselves anyway. And that will be better, that they should be known. And that means it's free, respectable women, Muslim women. Now, you're free because you're wearing a hijab. So they should be known so as not to be abused. Now, the Arabic word translated is abused. However, depending on the translation, it might say annoyed, harassed, hurt, given trouble, molested, affronted, assaulted, because lots of times these things are softened so that they don't offend English readers so much. But let's just see if this will play. If you can't hear it, let me know. Just let me
Sure.
know. Can you hear that?
It's very faint.
Okay. So
Oh, I
this
think
is,
I've seen this video. Yeah.
yeah,
The
this is
volume's
just
very
a
low,
man
very low.
following two women down the street demanding that they cover up. And at about the same time in the US, this is, I think, in Berlin. No, it's in the UK, Bradford. Bradford, okay. Large population of Muslims in Bradford. In the United States, there were a couple of girls in a car who were attacked in a garage for not wearing hijabs. Man just, I guess he knew they were Muslim and he just jumped in
Yeah.
and beating on them, you know. This is, how is this a free, respectable woman, you know? So anyway, I read this. I put this in the question. So this is what it says. Now, the problem is, of course, this is a risk now for all unveiled women. This is a matter of national security. This isn't a matter of your cultural right. This means all the women that are not wearing a hijab are now identified as being available for abuse. That's what it means. And that's what happened in Cologne on New Year's Eve when, you know, over 1,000 women were assaulted. And we've got the grooming gangs. That these are not seen as free, respectable women. These are Kafirs. They are unveiled. Basically, they deserve what they get. So, but that's,
Yeah.
this is what the doctrine presents. So I said, is it not better than that no women in non-Islamic countries, no women wear a veil so that none can be identified as available for attack? That only makes sense, right? If you've got a few people painted green and you don't attack those ones, isn't it better that nobody is painted green so that they're all
I
the
mean,
same? Yeah.
this shouldn't be happening in the West. And
Oh God,
see,
no.
the fact that this is happening in the West, and the UK is a prime example, and the European nations. I mean, you know, it's, I think, I can't remember her name, Eva. Her last name's fairly lengthy, but I mean, I remember one of her speeches where she basically said that for the first time in history, you know, it's not that the West is being overcome by a literal invading army, but it's all happening at the hands of our own leaders that are bringing in like cultures and religions that absolutely hate us, and it's like we're allowing this to happen without it in a legalized fashion is what amazes me. It's amazing watching the transformation, even in my lifetime, what I've seen happen like by what I'm going to say like a liberal globalist mentality. And I'm not quite sure, you know, to me in my mind, this is part of the plan for destabilization in my mind, so that you can kind of
Absolutely.
herd
Mhm.
the cattle in a certain direction to implement certain systems of control. Now I'm getting into all my theories, but to me this is like you provide the evidence, but to me this is, in my understanding, like you know, this is intentional in my mind. Like
Well,
it's
you know,
all, yeah.
yeah, I just want to say strange bedfellows. It's just like the Sikh organization aligning with
Yeah,
the National Canadian Council of Muslims. And then,
sure.
you know, we have the UN and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And they're imagining somehow that there is going to be some long-lasting alliance. There is no long-lasting alliance.
No.
In Iran, there were all kinds of radical groups. There were Marxists and you know all kinds of people in there when the revolution occurred. Oh, not to mention, you know, the LGBTQ people, you know, all thinking, because it
Oh
was a
yeah.
liberal, it was a quite secular. It had they had a ruler there who was not enforcing the Sharia, and for Islam, for those who practice it, all right, who want to follow the doctrine as it's actually laid out, that is anathema to have a ruler that is not abiding by the doctrine. And you see,
Yeah.
that's another. And so anyway, they all got together, but ultimately, of course, Islam triumphed because it was quite willing to throw people off the top of tall buildings. and slaughter
Yeah.
them, without a second thought. So, most groups aren't willing to do that, but they could absolutely do that because all of that is all right according to Islam. So,
Yeah,
they're
it's
yeah.
definitely a very interesting conversation. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, no, carry on.
So
Carry on.
these are little girls that were referred to as dirty, gory, dirty white girls. And I just refer again to unbelievers being the worst of creatures.
Hmm.
And Muhammad said, we let you have your wives, your dowries, and slave girls. So the Kafirs are hardly worth, they're just, there's a place in the Quran where it says they are less than cattle. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to make the point again, I'm not talking about people, all right? But they were not reported by their own community. And why not? Whoever conceals the faults of a Muslim, Allah will conceal him his faults in this world and the day of resurrection. So there is a reward in heaven for covering up for people who have done things that we consider horrific. If it's not horrific in Islam. I was listening to a video, a woman in Kuwait, okay? And she said quite clearly she had consulted with the sheikhs and the mullahs, and not the mullahs, the sheikhs and imams, a lot of Islamic scholars. And she said, why aren't we bringing more, slaves here? Because then men could have sex with them instead of risking our own good Muslim girls. Okay. And that is the mindset. People in the West don't have that mindset, and they find it very hard to put their mind around it. But that is what the doctrine teaches.
Wow.
So, yeah. Now, in Canada, well, all around the globe, in non-Islamic countries, are setting up these Sharia courts. Like I told you, it's estimated. Well, in England, they definitely have more than 85. That's like a minimum number, and they're not treated fairly. Okay, women, for instance, if there's a man dies and he had 4 wives, okay, and they don't all have to be declared. You can go fatwa shopping, but you can also go imam shopping to get yourself married. So if you have a marriage with one imam, or you register that marriage, then you go to a different imam and you have another marriage. You don't register that one. You can do this 4 times, right? So say that man dies, and particularly in non-Islamic countries, because now you don't have to support them all. Some of them may end up on social assistance, and apparently this is a real problem in Germany. And they know these women are suffering, and they're not allowed to talk about it. Okay, so so the man dies. Now the woman, if there is no child, is entitled to a quarter of the estate, divided by 4. If there's a child, she's entitled to 1/8 of the estate, divided by 4. So that is the sort of law that these councils are following. And it's being allowed in the US as well, apparently, under the Arbitration Act. Apparently, this has been going on for some time, but it is definitely going
Yeah.
on in the UK under the Arbitration Act. And it's happening in other countries all over the place, and they know it's happening. They're just setting up their own tribunals that are following Sharia. So here's an example locally, and you go to this Muslim youth group, okay, and it says marriage services, well, meaning Canada. And so this is happening here as well. You can get an Islamic or a legal marriage, and it's right on their website. No bones about it. Now, the EU said that they made a report on this. And I should say that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which I think we can definitely credit a lot of the attitude towards Islam, is owing to this, the UN. So when they tried to involve the Islamic states, and they certainly did, and they also introduced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Well, the Islamic states did not sign it. They refused to sign it because it's against Sharia. So they developed their own. But most people don't think that. They think, oh, we have the UN and we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No, we don't. 57 of those states
Yeah.
subscribe to an entirely different code of ethics, the Cairo Declaration, that follows
Yeah.
Sharia. They vote, they sit on councils, they sit on committees, they chair like human rights committees at the UN, and like those laws come down to affect all of us. So eventually the EU said, look, these people are often under considerable social pressure, mainly in their religious jurisdiction, marital issues, divorce. A man only has to say 3 times, I divorce you, and that's it. She's divorced. And he can even get an agent to do this for him. He doesn't have to do it personally. He can do it by email. She has no right to divorce. She has to get permission for
Yeah.
divorce. She may be able to go to court and get a divorce, but it's entirely
And
anyway.
this is allowed in Canada. Like this system is recognized.
Well, it's recognized in the UK under the Arbitration Act, and I don't know that Canada has formally done that, but I'm telling you that these exist. All right,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's, I
but
mean,
not as they
y-
our laws allow for arbitration, and so they call this arbitration
yeah.
because they decide amongst themselves. But oftentimes those women don't even know that they're eligible for English law or Canadian law. They don't know because they're living in a ghetto. And this is
Yeah,
required,
that's
they're
fair.
supposed to isolate themselves. And then why should we be surprised that, young men in the UK are growing up and participating in grooming gangs, even whole families together? It's fine. We'll go ahead and abuse those little girls. And it doesn't matter if your uncle knows about it. Here we would be ashamed. You wouldn't want your family to know you were doing that. But there, you might be there with your brother or your cousin. And this, because, the oftentimes these are people who they're
Yeah.
speaking Arabic in their neighborhood. They're going to Arabic shops. They're associating only with other Muslims. Where do they ever hear what's normal and what's normal? And they don't really, and we can't make them because their law says not to. Anyway, so and then we have these demands, and our government doesn't realize what it's doing. We have the special Islamophobia rep, and I say a couple of years ago she was presenting the hate crime statistics, and she said, well, and she said this all over the place, and everybody's broadcasting it. She says, hate crimes against Muslims has gone up 70%. And she didn't mention the fact that in the same statistics, the hate crimes against Christians had gone, Catholics specifically, had gone up 260%, and that Jews were 18 times more likely to be targeted per capita than a Muslim in this country. But
Yeah.
we have an Islamophobia rep who's only talking about Islam, and everybody goes, "Oh, the poor Muslims." They don't know the rest of the information, and that's takia, that's deception, which is permitted in the cause of Allah in the advance of Islam.
Sure.
We have anyway.
I
I
can
don't want
accept
to
that.
spend
Yeah.
more time on
Mm.
that. But this is the
Uh,
sort of thing that they put out, and so. And how accurate are they? I certainly haven't read them all in detail, but there are a lot of generalities that really are not very accurate in these things. And we had that was Canada. This is in the US, and they're
Yeah.
putting know your rights, know your rights, know your rights. And
This shouldn't even be happening here. To me, it's unbelievable that you come to Canada, okay? And I actually blame, like, our leaders are responsible for this. Because at any point in time, they could have just said, no, this is not going to take place. This is not going to happen. We're not going to facilitate, because the question is, why don't you go back to an Islamic ruled nation and live under the terms, that fit with your religious beliefs? But of course, that's not part of the civilization jihad plans that they have for the West, right? Because this is the way I understand it. And to me, it's like it's unbelievable. I have to keep emphasizing that. The fact that, like, our politicians, our leaders, like you said, it's the ideology, it's the doctrine, it's the theology that they need to look at. The individual
well,
is one thing, but like you said, if you allow this ideology to take root, you're just going to keep producing one jihadi after the next in all its forms, because you are allowing that you have to go to the root cause, the root cause. And if you don't have a strong constitution, that you uphold, and when you got leaders like Trudeau saying there's no core, no mainstream, like we're the first post-national state, this is the problem. Like, to me, the way
no,
I understand it to be, no core identity. I mean, you're just allowing, like you're facilitating,
yeah, yeah,
opposing ideologies to take root in the country when your
um,
own leader says something so stupid and
yeah,
so foolish. You
Yeah.
know, and I know he perceives himself to be benevolent and wise, but it's like you're inviting the enemy to just like, man, you can just walk right in
Well,
Canada. You could just
basically, he's
walk right
saying
in.
this is a vacant lot. What would you like to
Yes,
put
a
here?
hundred percent. And that's how I see Canada. It's just like just come on and take over.
Yeah,
Like you know, we don't stand for anything here
yeah,
because our own leaders said that 10
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
And that's why I keep emphasizing those words because they were very, very, very critical words. That is exactly the power coming against Canada is that no mainstream, no core identity, first post national state. And to me, there is a war going on here from within. You know, maybe you're starting to see some violent activity on the street, but it starts in the mind. It starts with the ideology. It starts with the doctrine. Anyway, yeah. So question number 6, you know, we've kind of talked about this a lot. Like, how does Islam use Western democracy against us, and what are the Canadian government officials doing about it, or are they heeding, you know, your well-researched warnings? So,
Well,
like,
they're not. They're definitely not.
exactly, yeah,
I have more luck outside of Canada than inside Canada. I am very sorry to say. Very, very sorry to say.
yeah,
Like,
it
like,
doesn't surprise me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So, Western norms, I want to say, they are derived from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Whether you follow them or you don't
yeah,
follow those tradition, those beliefs, okay,
yeah,
that is where the norms are derived from. All right, and in fact,
yes,
the historic name for Europe is Christendom. And what did that produce? Those norms produced a society, a Western society that was stable, okay, a place of freedom that countless people have sought as a refuge. So people want to come here because of what we are, but we are changing very rapidly. And we
yes,
have a heritage. We have something worth saving. We absolutely do. And we are like the most tolerant countries in the world. And that is being used against us because we are now bringing people in from the least tolerant countries of the world, and they are not tolerant towards us. And I wouldn't say
yeah,
peoples, because only Islam does this. No other major religion is a system of governance. It is only Islam that is going to set up this parallel legal system, this parallel taxation system. It is only Islam that does that. There's no other one that is
hmm,
organized, let alone with a finance military. I mean, not only does the manual, the Quran, establish the military, the jihad, it also finances it in Quran 960 when it says this is what you pay, okay, for the jihad. So so yeah, our Canadian officials are not paying attention. So yeah, I better. So there we go. So here's another principle. Every once in a while, I bring in a principle. So an Islamic principle, I don't know why that was there. Okay,
hmm,
is Wallo Obera. And this is the Islamic doctrine of loyalty and enmity. And this is a foundational principle of Islam. All right. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those with him are forceful against the disbelievers and merciful amongst themselves. And it's like I was speaking with somebody on LinkedIn recently, and she was saying that she had interviewed a Muslim woman for an HR position and said, "Why do you want this job?" And she said, "Well, because I want to make sure my family have jobs." Okay, because that is how it works in the Middle East. All right, there,
hmm.
and that's not how it's worked here. We used to have merit, as
Yeah, we used to.
but we've kind of lost that now. And I hope that doesn't continue. But to say that we are forceful against the disbelievers. Now, again, what is going to happen if people are in a position of being a publisher or a politician or anything? I mean, we've recently had an incident, and I'm sorry to even mention it, but it is a fact in Australia where we had two nurses who have online, everybody's seen it. Well, a lot of
Yeah,
people have seen it.
yeah, I
And
remember that one.
that Jewish man, if he was in their hospital, they would kill him. So how do
Yeah,
you feel safe? And that there are special rules for Muslims in the hospital. That if there's a Muslim in the hospital, there's a whole booklet telling you how they must be treated. For instance, if they've injured their right hand, they refuse to eat with the left. The nurse may be told she has to feed them because it's against their religion to eat with the left hand, because in Islam you're supposed to eat with the right hand. I mean, ridiculous stuff. How far will people be willing to go to appease a doctrine, like this? Anyhow, so the other thing is our schools. Like the
Yeah.
Muslim Association of Canada opened an Islamic college this year. Now they have an annual revenue of about $50 million, and our government gives grants to these and charitable status to all of these. And we have no idea how much the foreign funding is because they're not required to report it. So it says, building the future of Islamic education in Canada, join us in this transformative journey. Well, will that be transformative? What are they teaching? Authentically grounded in the Islamic worldview,
Yeah.
based on Islamic primary sources, the Quran and Sunnah. Now, when you look at our own texts, we are now introducing a little bit of information about other we'll have a category, religious studies, right? Like every province is a little different.
Yeah.
Now, a former colleague in Australia has done some work recently. He's just released it, and what he did is, after 9/11, they introduced some Islamic education. They thought they should have something in school. That's what they were told. But it's just like after 9/11, right across the United States, the phones were buzzing, and pastors were picking up the phone and being told this has nothing to do with Islam, because the same people who are in the mosques and saying we need to do this, that, and the other, and we need to follow the doctrine, are the ones who are now saying it has nothing to do with Islam. But deception is allowed. All right. So you basically got the fox in charge of the hen house. So he wanted to have a look at these exams. So it was introduced in 2003. They looked at 21 years worth of exams, and every year there were 10 questions. So there were 210 questions. And of the 210 questions, some of them focus specifically on the sort of religious aspect, and that is Miriam was the sister of Aaron and Moses, but it doesn't say that according to Islamic scripture, the Miriam was also the mother of Christ. Of course, there's about a 1,200-year difference there, but so things like that. So the Islamic doctrine takes doctrine from other faiths, okay, including Zoroastrianism and Judaism and Christianity, takes it, and the stories are a little different. For example, the story about Job in the Bible, Job did not strike his wife, but in Islam, Job did strike his wife. Anyway, so they take all these exams and they find a certain percentage on that sort of theological aspect. And some are specifically about Muslims, like that a Muslim, can marry 4 women, and that they will have that in there as well. There's only 10 questions. 1.5% of the doctrine of the questions, only 1.5% was about the non-Muslim. So they're teaching this, and who is vetting all of these courses? It's not a Coptic Christian, from Egypt. It's not a Christian from Nigeria, northern Nigeria. It's not a Hindu. Okay, they're vetting their own work, and it's being presented in a way that they want to have it presented. So it is forbidden in Islam. It is haram to do anything that would benefit the non-Muslim over the Muslim. And so, it's to be, if you could see what they teach in Saudi schools, all right, this is what we can expect. I have a list of these questions. It's published every few years. They look at these texts. And it says, you can kill an apostate. It says you can kill a gay person. It says that you can beat your wife. That's what they teach in the Saudi texts. And that's what we can expect is going to be taught here.
Well, no, yeah, carry on. Yeah, you got another slide there.
Well, I just wanted to show this because
Yeah.
when I talk about infiltration and using Muslims as more than just, a shield, in the sense that, there is this compulsory, this mandatory religion over the system of governance. And this is the costume it wears, all right? Then it is so compulsory that death to apostates, if they dare to leave, because this cover is so essential for this system of governance, because that is the patina that people look at. So you take these innocent people who really have no idea, because they're supposed to consult with the scholars, and they're out in the workforce. And what gets organized? Okay, so this is the Council of American Islamic Relations. Now, the National Canadian Council of Muslims used to be called CARE Canada, and they've changed their name. But nevertheless, there's an affiliation. They have the same kind of booklets, do the same kind of thing with the legal representation. 7 years ago, CARE came out with an app, okay? And every Muslim employee has now been utilized as a tool of jihad. Because if you have a complaint, I went in and did it myself to make sure it was really easy. It is really easy. You just click, I have a complaint. And then you can pick any country around the world. And I heard about this, I learned about it from a company in France. And they're trying to help employers who are being deluged with complaints that are going before tribunals who know nothing about Sharia. And it's costing them, millions of dollars to defend themselves. And they will have a complaint, we want a prayer room, he's not giving it to us. We want time off to go on Hajj. We want Friday afternoons off. We need to have prayer time at these hours. And it can get right out of control. So all of these things, but then you can also complain about a publication you don't like. And there's 3 categories. So you make your complaint and you decide what country you're in. And it gives you a guideline, like, do not, collect everything in writing. Do not arbitrate with your employer. Don't agree to a different position or something. We will handle it. And they will take it right up to Supreme Court for you. And it's all pro bono. So like I said, Lincoln's Inn is graduating all of these lawyers. And how are they going to be using it? Well, they could very easily be using it against the English people or against the American people. The developers in Michigan saying, we'll get some lawyers who are going to make sure we get this development through with 75% of the money going to mosques, so we won't have any non-Muslims living there. Or we're going to have a pro bono lawyer who's working for CARE, who is going to take this case right up to Supreme Court to make sure more Sharia and more Sharia and more Sharia is introduced to the workplace. And this is how a country becomes Islamized. And they're consulting with people who adhere to this doctrine. And that's a problem. So I'm going to come out here now. You said.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is an excellent, I mean, it's definitely the best conversation I've ever had about some of these issues. I mean, these are issues of real concern. And again, I'm going to emphasize, like, it's about root cause analysis. And also when you start to see that there's a problem here, the call to leadership to me is you need to look at the doctrine. You need to look at what the imams, the sheikhs, the mullahs, especially the ones too that are in Islamic ruled nations, right? Because ultimately what's there is the final end result, right, of the full Islamization of a nation, right? And then you can see how it begins, in European nations, how it's beginning in Canada. And to me, it's obvious. It's obvious what's happening. And like based on the evidence too that you're presenting. I mean, it's but of course there's a commercial, there's an outward commercial, in its beginning forms, right? Like this is how it begins. And of course, it all seems benevolent and, yes, we're aligned with the West, but no, you're not actually. When you look at the texts, you have to go to the root sources. You have to go to, like you mentioned the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sirah, I think are some of the main works, to look into. And yeah, I'm definitely going to spend as much time as I can. I mean, you're only one person. I can only do so much, but
well, we cut all the fluff. And the thing is that for the fact that there are fatwas that conflict with each other, one says you can have juror in this case, and the other one says, no, I don't think you should. You might be able to get it down the street, right? So for all of that, none of them can conflict with the primary doctrine. None of them would
that's right.
ever conflict with Muhammad and Allah, never. So why not just go to Muhammad and Allah? Skip the
Yeah,
middleman.
that's right. I mean, that's basically to me the way I do my research too. You got to go to the root source. You got to go, I mean, that's where it begins.
Yeah.
Now, I'm obviously not everyone's going to become a radical jihadist. I understand that. But I also feel that what you're saying is right and it's true. And if it were up to me, I would put a stop to all this because to me, if you want to practice this kind of quote unquote religion, it should remain within the Islamic world, is what I would say. And certainly the gates would be closed if it were up to me. And this needs to be addressed for what it is.
Well, I'll
But
point out that in Israel in 1948, the Muslims sorted themselves, right? And the ones who wanted to follow the doctrine and kill the Jews left. They left.
you mentioned that, yeah,
Right.
that's very
So
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And so, in Israel, you may think, there's no problem with Muslims, there's just a few radicals. But actually there was a mix and they sorted themselves. And this could happen anywhere, depending on, the situation, because Islam has an imperative, and that is to spread Islam if you can. You're not even supposed to leave an Islamic country unless you're supposed to stay with Muslims, unless there is the opportunity to expand Islam. All right.
yeah.
So though the ones who don't want to do that, who maybe came here a few generations ago to get away from that, you know, no problem. But there is no way that
Yeah.
we ourselves can tell the difference. There's no way at all. So what we need
And
to do is bolster our laws to protect the society that we enjoy, because that's what a lot of people came here for.
and
And
that's
and that's
yeah.
only humane. That is humane. Okay. It's like, I have nothing against Muslims per se. There are Afghan women who reach out to me sometimes hoping I can help them because these Islamic organizations do not. And I have actually helped different women write a letter to appeal to these organizations. But when you go to these activist organizations, what does it say on their homepage? It says Islamophobia. It's complaint, complaint. We're not getting this. Where do you see anything about the Afghan women? You see nothing. What is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation doing on their behalf? It's doing nothing. And they say, oh, well, we can't, that's a country. No, they can. They could bring in fatwas. They could put all kinds of pressure on, but they do absolutely nothing, because ultimately the one hand serves the other.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, no, yeah, the sword of Islam spreads, doesn't it? But let's just wrap it up here with,
Well,
I think we've kind of
question
answered
seven,
question number 8 here is
well, you wanted me to come out and tell you about question 7, how I became impassioned to work for Canadians. Here,
yes, yes, yes.
stick
That
to
is
the
question number
script.
7.
Stick to the script.
Yeah.
All right. All I wanted to say is I love Canada. I love people. All right. I don't like bullies. I don't like to see people harmed at all. And this is not how I planned on spending my retirement. Now, like you read at the beginning, in 1983, I spent Christmas unexpectedly with a Baha'i who told me the story of him, of he and his friends, all the Baha'is, so many people who were tortured and killed at the time of the Iranian Revolution. And for me, that was a shock. And I have to tell you that growing up with, 40 foster brothers and sisters, many of them street kids, I saw a lot of stuff kids don't usually see. And then I'm working as a child protection social worker, and I see a lot of stuff people don't see. It takes a lot to shock me. That shocked me. A genocide, a whole group of people simply because of immutable characteristics, whether it's the color of their skin or the religion that they follow. You don't kill people for something like that. A whole group of people. This is insane, you know?
Yeah.
So that's when my interest began, and it's grown since then with 911. I had been at the World Trade Center. That shocked me. I'd been reading biographies of people and things like that in the meantime. And then I found the work of Dr. Bill Warner. The statistical analysis made it very simple to understand, but it was about doctrine. So now I start to study the doctrine, and then I see my country changing, and it's not something in the Middle East anymore. It's here.
Yeah.
And so whereas I had planned to be reading Old English literature in my dotage,
Yeah.
instead I'm out here because it's in my head and I can see it's needed, and so I share it.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you've done actually. And actually I'd recommend like Pierre Poilievre take a look at some of your work.
At
You
your
know, he doesn't
video, at your video. This is
Well,
great.
of course,
I'm
yeah. I
really
mean, like
proud
take
of
a
all.
look. It's about the information you're presenting.
Well, I can
And to
share a
me,
lot more. I can
yeah,
share
I mean, this is becoming a problem, and this
yeah,
needs to be addressed by leadership. So that's
there
my
is,
call, right?
yeah, yeah,
You know,
there
would
is a way to
be,
fix this. And I'm gonna
yeah.
sort of head there in the next question. You forget there was another question?
Oh, yeah, no, 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 absolutely. You know, is it Islam compatible with Western culture? Like
Oh,
traditional, let's
yeah.
call it Judeo-Christian culture. You know,
Well,
is Islam
may I go
compatible?
back to my slides and show a couple more?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right, we're gonna go back there. And here we go. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and our charter. All right. Our charter says there is freedom of religion, there is freedom of conscience, and that people, there's nothing about your race or your religion, and the Universal Declaration does the same thing. Now, I'd like to point out that Canada doesn't have laws against slavery per se because we've never had slavery here, right? It isn't equipped at all to deal with cultures that are coming here now that we're unfamiliar with. They don't fit into our legal system. So we need to bolster our legal system to protect it and to have a threshold and to say, I'm sorry, you have to meet these in order to qualify for legal status. Now, I want to say that as a social worker, you're very familiar with the fact that there's a legal father and there's a biological father, and one has legal rights and the other one doesn't. Okay? They're still a father. People can believe whatever they want. But if we're going to be having schools, they need to be teaching what is compatible with our charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah.
It's so I think that's pretty plain, and they need to be following our laws. And I heard someone say recently, "Oh well, Islam says, oh well, it will follow the law of the land." No, Islam doesn't say that. The other faiths do. Islam does not. It says if follows the leader, even if he is an Ethiopian slave with a head like a raisin, so long as he is ruling by the book of Allah. That is the qualifier. And our leaders are not. Okay. That's why we have these parallel legal systems setting themselves up. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says they are endowed with reason and conscience. And Islam does not. Allah knows and you do not. That's what Islam says. And it also says the fighting has been enjoined on you while it is hateful. Perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. Allah knows, you do not. That is basically what Islam is about, but there's more. So halal is simply means that it is allowed. Slavery is allowed. Now, there was slavery. I mean, you can read books about redheaded slaves in the harems in the 19th century, because I won't get into slavery here. It's a huge topic, but the Islamic slave trade is 14 centuries worth. It's incredible. And so because they're in the UN, although they have their own their own Cairo Declaration of Human Rights, nevertheless they have to sort of go along with some things, and so there's slavery, against laws against slavery now on the books, but blind eyes are turned to them. So there are Coptic Christian girls who are being captured, forced to convert, okay, and in Egypt, and they are being sold to Saudis for $2,000, $2,500. You can find all this in Coptic Christian Solidarity. You can go to their website. They're always appealing for help. There are Hindu girls that are being captured. There are slaves in Mauritania, like I said, descendant slaves,
Yeah.
and in Nigeria. So I do believe that when Islam has the upper hand, like that woman in Kuwait said, that slavery will be back in full force. All right. So polygamy up to 4 wives, a marriage, equal rights, full consent. Children can be married, and for a virgin child, then the father, the grandfather, they have a right to say who they will marry. There's no freedom to leave Islam, and this violates Article 18. Apostasy is punishable by death penalty for blasphemy. Article 19, freedom of opinion and
Yeah.
expression, discrimination against non-Muslims, the dhimmi status, free rights to everyone without distinction. That doesn't happen for women. It doesn't happen for non-Muslims. They're treated less than. Unequal inheritance and legal status for women. corporal punishments, is subjected to torture, cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment. Hands are amputated, feet are amputated, people are stoned, they're flogged. This goes on a daily basis in Islamic countries. A 15-year-old boy lost his head in Iraq because he was listening to Western music. So, you know, that's this is my website. And
Yeah, no, of course, yeah, show, yeah, yeah,
okay, I'll go back to the
absolutely.
website. It's just
Perspectives
on
on
Islam.
Islam dot
That's the
info.
name of my society.
Yeah,
And
100%. I
oh,
mean,
I really recommend it because all of the Islamic doctrine is on the homepage. Don't take my word for anything, please. Look it up yourself. I encourage people to do this. And there's a little tutorial there showing you how to do it. And the resource page is loaded on all the different subjects, whether it's Islamic finance or it's women or it's slavery or it's, you know, things like statistics, history, everything you can imagine. And they're all categorized so that you can look up what you want. There's some free articles. There's some books that can be downloaded from archive.com. There's some videos. Person doesn't need to have a dime to learn about Islam. It's free. Just take it, please. And then, so if you got that, then this is my book. And this is a primer, okay? So usually people buy a book about Islam and it's about, you know, it's about jihad, or it's about a biography, or it's about history, or, you know, it's very, you know, monotopical. And it doesn't, and you can buy books about the doctrine too, but they don't connect the doctrine to current events. So that's what this does. It's a collection of essays. And it begins with the foundational doctrine, explains why, what it is, why it can't be modernized. It's impossible. Muhammad's dead. The Quran is perfect. It cannot be modernized. So it explains that. And then there are essays that put the doctrine in the context of current events, like I've been doing here now. And when you get to the end, there's a little bit longer essay about women, about the Muslim Brotherhood, then a synopsis of Sharia that I haven't really seen anywhere else, just to give you an idea of the categories. Everything you can imagine falls under Sharia. And then a final essay to propose some things that really need to be changed at a basic level, but actually more needs changing than that. But anyway, so that's my book. So it's available on Amazon, and yeah.
oh, that's great. That's excellent. I mean, I'm glad you've taken the time, you know, to make these resources available, like to us all. You know, like one of the key strategies in my mind is education. The battle starts in the mind, and to me, if you can identify the root cause of the problem, you know, that's and of course, I think one of the solutions is using legislation to protect Western values, the traditional Judeo-Christian values. I mean, we are under attack all throughout Europe, basically because this is my take. We've abandoned that value system, and to me, like the gates are down, and you know, our enemies are coming quickly. That's how I see it. Because we've abandoned, like to me, like the traditional Judeo-Christian value systems and what we consider to be like right from wrong. I tell you, you know, all throughout history in the scriptures that I've read, when you do that, guess what happens? Like to me, like there's a level of protection, you know, that's relinquished and the enemies are coming in. And like
Well,
unless we actually like of course you are someone there like warning leaders, anyone that has any interest, you know, and my appeal too is to lawyers. You know, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to try and protect us
oh, I've reached out
from,
to lawyers too.
yeah, from
Just
radical ideologies, right? Yeah,
you
I
know, I'm
mean,
not going to
well,
live forever. People, I'm old. For heaven's sakes, get while the getting's good. Come talk to me.
why we still have the freedom too, right? I mean, because that might
Exactly,
change as well.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
then we won't be able to do these things. But no, I want to
But
thank you, Elaine.
I,
Yeah,
I,
like for your
I
time
just
here.
want to
You know,
point
it's
out one more thing, and that
oh,
is
absolutely.
nobody is wanting to migrate to Islamic states. They protect
Yeah,
their doctrine. You dare not criticize their doctrine, okay? Which is their laws, which is their governance. You dare not, okay?
yeah,
Now, I'm not saying that we do that. What I am saying is that we protect our system of governance. We protect our charter, you know, And
Yeah.
Islam is incompatible with it. That's all there is to it. It's upside down world, you know?
Yeah,
And
100%.
yeah, and so if the Islamic states are protecting something that we wouldn't want, why don't we protect something that we do want, that we need in order to continue having a free society? Like, and I will say that all my life, Canada has been multicultural, always. You know, I have
Yeah.
foster brothers and sisters of every description, of every faith, and you know, I mean, you name it. And
Mhm.
many Indigenous foster brothers and sisters as well. And we always had a multicultural society in the sense that we were all Canadian and we brought our traditions. So my next door neighbors were German. So I got to celebrate Christmas twice, you know, on Christmas Eve with them and on Christmas Day with us. And they could
Yeah.
come over to ours and we would have folk fest. And everybody would share all of their different food, whether it was Mexican or Hungarian or Ukrainian or what it was, you know,
Right.
and it was primarily European. And Canada was the north end of the Underground Railway when slaves were trying to escape the United States and you know have some freedom
Yeah.
before the Civil War. So Canada has always been a very welcoming, open, generous, you know, multicultural country, but we were one country, we were Canada. And now we are divided like crazy. And
Yeah.
we have got elements in the country that don't share those same values. And if we want to protect them, we don't do it the way we are now, which is very, very divisive. And I did send my book to politicians. I bought,
Yeah.
gave, okay, this is not a moneymaker. I bought and
Yeah.
gave about 150 of my own books to politicians, including the UK and the US. And in Canada, oh, around about 140 politicians received my book. I don't know how many read it, how many would have read it and not contacted me. And believe me, I write to politicians. I've been doing that for years, and that's why I finally went to social media. They don't want to talk to us, and that has to change. That has to
Yes, it
change.
does.
Are
Yeah,
putting
and you know what?
answers where they're looking.
Um, they will not be held guiltless because you're like a watchwoman and you're providing the documentation, the research as a warning. And these people that have the power that turn the blind eye, they will be held responsible for what they've done. Because they do have the power, they can look into these things, and part of the problem is the cowardice at work within Western leadership that I see. It's
Well,
not everyone, but the
they,
majority of
if
them. Yes, I would call you a coward
if
because you're
if
unwilling to look at truth. You're unwilling to look at the evidence for what it is. You would rather stay in the safety of the consensus, which you
if
might be able to have your nice little easy life, but you will be held responsible in my world when things are gonna like I'm not gonna speak of those things, but you will be held accountable and responsible because you cannot hide in the consensus when the truth comes knocking on your door.
Well, the
For
thing is, they don't know that there is a solution, and they're never going to know
yeah,
if they don't start talking to somebody else besides the people who are adhering, who are advising them now, because
yeah,
there, honestly, there is very serious way that we can easily protect people's, you know, rights as defined by the charter, and that's all we need to
sure.
protect, right?
Yeah,
And at
we
the
can
same
start.
time,
Yeah, exactly. That's a very
gain
neutral.
support and educate. Now, you know, our schools have done a grave disservice to our kids. They have been brainwashed. I know in many ways because I know what's been going into the schools. There's been so much material, you know, green square campaigns for Islamophobia and listening to
Mhm.
videos about, you know, children talking about Islamophobia. I mean, this has just been pounded into them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
books to read that, you know, talk about Islamophobia.
Oops, Elaine, I think I lost you there. Not
And
sure
these
what
are the
happened.
people who are now grown and advising others, and they have not been given correct information. But so what's required is not only to give a politician the information he needs, but that he gains support and educates the public. And there is a way to do that. Trust me.
Yeah,
We need the country
100%.
to be educated quickly, all at once, and support, and that will come. But there is a way to do this, and they need to talk to me, please.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, we'll ask Pierre Poilievre to take a look at your work and just to consider what's said, right? Consider the evidence you're presenting. And okay, well, thanks, Elaine Ellinger. We appreciate your time. Of course, people can find you at your website, perspectivesonislam.info. You are on X. You have your own Substack. You're on LinkedIn. You're pretty well everywhere. So yeah, like reach out to Elaine. She's the right person to talk about this stuff. It's in a very non-threatening way. It's evidence-based. She's looking at the doctrine, the theology. I mean, I consider her to be an expert on the matter from a non-Muslim's perspective. It's excellent.
Exactly.
It's
Yes,
exactly what we need for
yes.
today, and it's not Islamophobia. This is
Well,
it's a warning for what it
well,
is.
it's, it's the opposite. I really care about people, and I care
Yeah,
about
you care
those
about the future
Muslims
of
who
Canada.
are suffering under the Islamic boot, and we all will be eventually if this doesn't turn around. And I
100%.
want to thank you for inviting me today, very much.
Oh
And
yeah, of course. You're
if
always welcome
people
here
are
in my space. I mean,
uh,
yeah,
if
I mean, you
people are
know, you're a
watching this,
pioneer.
I just encourage people to share it. And I know it's long. Maybe watch half of it, put a little note underneath, watch half of
Sure.
it today, half of it tomorrow, but please watch the whole thing and share it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elaine. Take care now. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Appreciate your time. Bye
Bye now.
now.